Hi, my name is Dr. Shay Kirchhoff. I am an associate professor at the University of Missouri St. Louis. And today we're going to talk about what the cognitive science research says about reading. The first thing that research tells us is that reading is an interactive process. The interactive process involves many components and different parts of the brain. The phonological processor associates sounds and words, an extension of oral language. The orthographic processor connects letters to sounds. The meaning processor activates knowledge of what makes meaning. So the meaning processor activates our part of our brain that connects the word to the meaning and activates reasoning to make sense based on the context. So if we come across the word plate, are we talking about the context of dinnerware? Are we talking about a dish? Or are we talking about science and we're talking about the Earth's crust? The interactive process is not linear, but recursive. This means as each processor helps the others, it pulls knowledge from prior experiences about the world or prior knowledge about reading in order to make meaning. As a recursive process, all of these processes interact. And it also means that reading is not linear. It's not about simply reading once from start to finish. So you don't just pick up a book necessarily and read it from page 1 to page 10 once, set it down and move on. It's a more involved process, a cyclical process, where we reread, we revisit things, we reflect, we might return to a specific word or section in order to make meaning. So if we're able to keep reading and we see that the context is a different context than we first assumed, then we can go back and reread in order to make sense of the words. We keep returning and revisiting and rereading as we're reading to deepen our understanding and connect ideas together. The second point is that reading has a reciprocal relationship to knowledge. Background knowledge, or the knowledge that we're bringing to a text, has this reciprocal relationship with reading fluency and, most importantly, with comprehension. So if we are understanding what we're reading as we're reading it, we're able to read more fluently. In other words, if you have the knowledge about the topic of the text, you will find the text easier to comprehend. So if you know what the words mean, if you have experience with the concepts, you can make connections to that knowledge with what you're reading to help comprehension. On the other hand, when you read, you can learn new knowledge. So when you're reading, the more experiences you have with reading, you build knowledge about reading itself. You gain knowledge about texts and genres and books. You also gain knowledge about the topics that you're reading. So when you read, you build knowledge, and that in turn helps you comprehend other texts. So it's this continuous reciprocal relationship. The more you know, the more you're able to understand what you read, and the more you read, the more you know. The science of reading research also tells us that children need explicit and systematic instruction of phonemic awareness and phonics. They need to understand that words are made up of sounds and that sounds are connected to letters, that letters create words, words create sentences and texts. So this is really essential in early childhood, early grades. However, teaching phonemic and phonics is not enough. The National Reading Panel found that phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension are all components necessary for a reading curriculum. So when we think about different developmental levels, this looks differently in early childhood than it might look in upper grades. We can also think about the time spent on each of these components. So perhaps in early childhood, we spend more time on phonemic awareness, and in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, we spend more time on phonics. In perhaps third grade, fourth grade, we're spending more time on fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, and so forth. But it's not that that is a linear order. It's not that we should only be teaching one and then the next and the next and the next. We can be teaching in a comprehensive way all 5 of those big pillars explicitly and systematically, starting with phonemic awareness and phonics, but not to the exclusion of others. Further, research points to the need for all teaching, reading included, to be culturally relevant, responsive, and sustaining. So history shows us that big pushes for phonics in early grades has led to less attention in intermediate and adolescent literacy. But history also shows us that we need this comprehensive and culturally sustaining approach, including the explicit instruction of decoding skills, but with authentic experiences with text, connected to picture books, connected to novels, connected to informational texts, connected to primary sources. So these authentic and connected experiences across the K-12 spectrum in order to make real change. In fact, Timothy Shanahan, the National Reading Panel Chair and Reading Hall of Fame member, said, "We need a comprehensive K-12 literacy curriculum that teaches all those things we've been talking about all the way through for everybody. That's the only way you're ever going to see increases in literacy across the board." One way to do that is to integrate reading and writing instruction. Teaching reading and writing in an integrative way improves both reading and writing. Discussion supports text comprehension and writing development. So when we think about integrated literacy instruction, that includes reading, writing, speaking, listening, viewing, and visually representing. It also includes creative and critical thinking. So rather than taught as isolated sets of skills, teaching reading should be connected to making meaning with texts that are of interest and are that are rich for children. We can integrate other literacy practices by talking about what we're reading, drawing and writing about what we're reading. And teaching writing should be more than just spelling and handwriting. We can use words to tell stories, to express our ideas, and to share our thoughts that we want others to read. We can read as writers, so we can read for meaning of the content, but we can also read for author's craft. What are the moves the author's making? And we can we can read as writers and we can write as readers to respond to our reading. Number 5, research shows us that when students are having difficulty, they should be provided targeted support. So we have different kinds of assessment. We have screening assessments that might show if a student is having a difficulty, but screeners do not necessarily tell us what needs to be targeted. We can then use formative assessments informally and formally in the classroom through observations, through listening to children reading aloud, also to viewing their writing. We can also use diagnostic tests, and that can help educators pinpoint the difficulty a student is having in order to provide the needed support. So formative assessments can be designed by teachers in a way that illuminate if the student needs specific phonological knowledge, if the student needs to practice fluency, if the student needs strategies for comprehension, or if the issue is related to background knowledge. And so we find that sometimes phonics is treated as a one-size-fits-all intervention, but not all students who are experiencing struggle or challenge with reading have deficiencies in phonological skills or knowledge. So we need to pinpoint, is it about decoding? Is it phonemic awareness? Are there certain sounds that they need to add to their knowledge base? Is it phonics? Are there certain letters that are, or syllable types or blends that are tripping them up? Or is it comprehension? And then sometimes it's both. As with all research, it comes with limitations. So the way that the science of reading is often talked about in marketing materials or the media can be a narrow glimpse of the actual body of scientific research on reading and reading education. Broad, sweeping claims that we know how to teach reading, or on the other end of the spectrum, that everything we learned about reading is wrong, are not accurate. So there's always more we can learn, and not everything that we have been doing is wrong. We do have a body of scientific research that points to evidence-based practices. Yes. But there is no magic pill, silver bullet, or secret sauce. What works for one child may not work for another child. And what works with kindergarten students may not work with your 5th grade student, and vice versa. As teachers, we have to resist the temptation to assume that there will be a quick fix. That said, it is an exciting time for literacy, as research, policy, and practice are converging in ways that could lead to amazing benefits for children.